This is the first of several videos on motivation, and we're really actually going to start with the concept of learning and build from learning to reinforcement theory and then move from that into motivation. And we're going to spend a lot of time looking at some different theories of motivation, and even when we eventually switch over to our discussion of job satisfaction, we're still really going to be continuing this discussion of motivation. So this is a pretty significant chunk of material that we're going to be covering here. So we'll start out with this idea of learning because it's important to pay attention to learning in an organization. And as we talk about it, we will, from my view, the way I see it is that some of the basics of how learning happens are the building blocks of motivation. So that's why, even though it's not linked this way in your book, I link it this way in terms of how I present it in these lecture videos, because I think it makes more intuitive sense to build on what we know about learning to what we know about reinforcement to what we know about motivation. All right, so let's start with learning, and this is the definition of a relatively permanent change in knowledge or behavior as a result of practice or experience. We're all familiar with learning. I mean, hopefully you're doing some of it right now. Why do organizations care about learning? Well, of course, they should care quite a bit about learning because we want people to learn in a workplace. I mean, of course, we want people to learn in school as well, but when you're in the workplace, I mean, expect that you will be learning a lot. And in fact, if you're not learning anything, I suspect you won't really be very happy with what you're doing, nor will the organization maybe be very happy with you. So organizations invest a lot in training and teaching people how to do the basics of their job, how the industry works, how their organization works. Some organizations are even, they don't just train you for your current job, but they hopefully train you and want you to learn so that you can grow and progress and move on and take on greater responsibilities. So we want people to learn. And there's a lot of different ways that people learn. You can learn through the dissemination of information, just like this. You can learn through experience and hands-on training on how to do something. Our focus here is really on what to do. How do we learn what to do, and how do we learn what not to do? That's going to be really the focus of what we're talking about here. And with organizations, we want people to learn to do certain things, but we only want them to do. We also want them to learn not to do certain things. So there's limits to what we want people to learn. I want you to learn how to execute your job. I want you to learn not to engage in counterproductive behaviors. I want you to learn, how to conduct yourself professionally. I don't really want you to learn how to be a slacker, how to be unprofessional in your relationships with your coworkers or with clients. So I want you to learn that there are preferred ways of doing things, preferred expectations of behavior here. So the questions for us are, what influences learning, and how do people learn this? How do people learn what to do, what not to do? I mean, sure, I could just tell you, but and that's not ineffective. But there's a lot of other ways that people learn that in some ways can dominate over what they're told to do or what they're not told to do. So we want to take a look at some of that. Before we get into that how-to, I want you to pay attention to this idea of goal orientation in terms of this being an important factor that influences learning in people. Now we're going to talk in a later video about goal-setting theory, which even though this says goal and that says goal, these are really unrelated concepts. The idea of learning and goal orientation is basically that we bring with us anywhere we go some kind of attitude, and our attitude toward whatever it is we're doing affects how and the way in which we do it and whether or not we'll even want to do what it is that we're doing. And so when it comes to learning, our attitude toward learning affects how well and how receptive we will be to learn. So regardless of your disposition or your personality, your attitude at any given time, which changes situationally, will affect how receptive you are to learning. Right? And we would talk about, in this domain, we would talk about people having a couple of different attitudes or orientations is the term that gets used a lot. You could have a learning orientation, which is this first one. And a learning orientation means basically what it sounds like, that you are oriented toward learning, that you are focused on learning. Your attitude is such that you want to learn. That is your primary interest or focus in a given situation. You want to develop your skills, your competence, your ability. If you don't know something, that's okay because you're focused on learning it. You're not afraid to try things out and experience failures if you're really if you really have a learning orientation, because a failure is not really a big deal. It just shows you what you need to learn, and that's good because you want to learn. So you're happy to experience the limits of what you know, because that is conducive to further learning. So if you have a learning orientation, this is what you will care about. And then the alternative, or an alternative kind of orientation, or orientations, we would call performance orientations. This is where, instead of your focus being on learning, your primary focus is on the demonstration of your existing competence, or avoiding showing that you're incompetent in some way. So there's a couple of different kinds of performance orientations talked about in your book. I'm just kind of clumping them together here. But the idea of a performance orientation is that your goal in a situation is not to learn, it's to do well. So, and these are really significant. These are very significant differences. You know, and you can think about it in terms of your role in this class. What is your orientation towards school in general, or to this class in particular? Do you have a learning orientation, or do you have a performance orientation? And if you have a performance orientation, you might not even really be watching this video. Or if you are, you may not be paying very close attention to it. Because your goal is to say, what do I need to do well in this class? And that's it. I don't really, if you judge, if you have a performance orientation and for some reason you judge that watching these videos doesn't help you do well in this class, you won't do it. Because even though you might learn something if you do it, that's not your focus. Your orientation would be on doing well on an exam. Whereas if you're really learning oriented, you really want to learn, then you will watch these videos, no question. Even if you find that, hey, different ones of them seem more or less significant to me than others, or certain readings seem more or less significant for doing well on an exam than others, well, I want to learn, so I'm going to expose myself to as much as I can, right? Now, of course, I think that watching these videos will help you perform well as well, but that's beside the point. So let's take another example. You get an exam back or an assignment back, either in this class or in any class, and you didn't get a grade that you would have liked. Okay, what's the difference between how you're going to respond if you have a learning orientation versus a performance orientation? If you have a performance orientation, are you going to go back and try to study and learn what you didn't do well on if you know that you'll never be tested on it again? Probably not. What you might focus on is talking to the professor about boosting your grade, or how I can do better next time because I really want to do well. But your focus is not ultimately on learning. It's focused on performance, doing well. And there are ways to do well you might focus on that really don't have anything to do with learning. For example, arguing for a grade has nothing to do with learning necessarily. Now, coming in to talk about it and understand why you didn't do well, that's learning oriented. That's a learning oriented behavior. But to try to say, well, I think I should have gotten this, that's more of a performance oriented behavior. And so if you're learning oriented, on the other hand, and you didn't do well on a test, you may still want to discuss your grade, argue your grade. It's not that you won't do that, but what you probably would want to do is, once you're clear on what you didn't know, you would go back and learn it because you care about learning. So if you find that in your classes you don't ever go back and learn what you didn't know, you just move right on, that's probably an indication that you're not very strongly learning oriented in that particular domain. Now, take this outside of class, put it in a workplace. If you're not learning oriented in a workplace, how receptive are you going to be to training, or to doing new things, or to trying new things? Because if you're really oriented to performance, you may not want to fail. You may want to just focus on things you already know. You may not want to push yourself. So I have to know that if I want my employees to learn, there's going to be differences in how well and how receptive they will be to learn, depending on what their orientations are. And it's wise for somebody in an organization to say, well, hey, learning is important in this particular domain. How do I get my employees to adopt a learning orientation now for this domain? Like I would do that for this class. How do I get students who aren't already oriented toward learning to want to learn? How do I encourage that? I can't make it, but how do I encourage it? So by showing you early on the value of this class, or the importance of these concepts, or how you can use them and how they can make a positive difference in your life, part of what I'm doing there is trying to get you to want to learn and therefore adopt more of a learning orientation. Because if you have that, then you will learn more, right? Okay, so but anyway, moving on, let's assume that people have a learning orientation and so they are receptive to learning. Well, then how do they learn? Well, one way that people learn is through observation. And your book goes into some detail on social learning theory, which I'm not going to go into detail on here. but basically the idea is we watch other people, we see what they do, we see what they don't do, we see how they do it, and we see what happens to them as a result of it. And all of that stuff we internalize, and that affects our own learning. We learn how to do things by watching other people. We learn what to do and what not to do by watching other people. And while you can understand the process by reading the book, what I will underscore here is a key implication that because of the fact that people learn by observation, in part, we have to lead by example. We can't behave in a certain way, but then expect others to be a different way. So if your parents ever said to you, do as I say, not as I do, nothing against your parents, but that's actually not a very good way to teach children anything. It's pretty ineffective. It's ineffective in management too. If you have a manager who's always coming in late but tells you you need to go, get to work on time, or you have other coworkers who are always coming in late and there's no real consequences, but they keep telling you coming into time is important, well, that's not going to work. People are going to do what they see. It's going to really dominate. That's going to send messages about what's really important here, what the real culture, let's say, is really like. And this is how people learn what to do. They watch.